And yet another very wonderful evening out there to all of you, my dearest of friends. We left off in Ezekiel 22, where the Lord He tells them plainly in Ezekiel 22 about their sins, why this judgment is coming. And it kind of reminds me of a father right before he's about to discipline his child, and he's telling him the reasons why he's being punished. That way, he will not fall back into that same path that leads to such punishment from the parent. Well, today we're going to be speaking on these two women. And once again, the Lord is trying to show them in every single way so that they'll understand, because so many of them don't understand why this wrath is coming upon them. And this is just another telling of why, but it's through imagery. The word of the Lord came again unto me, saying, Son of man, there were two women, the daughters of one mother, and they committed whoredoms in Egypt. They committed whoredoms in their youth. There were their breasts pressed, and there they bruised the teats of their virginity. And the names of them were Aholah the elder, and Aholibah her sister, and they were mine. And they bare sons and daughters. Thus were their names: Samaria is Aholah, and Jerusalem is Aholibah. This is a history of the apostasy of God's people from him, a history of it, and the aggravation thereof. In this parable, Samaria and Israel bear the name Aholah, her own tabernacle, which is what Aholah means, her own tabernacle, Samaria, so that's hers and not God's, because the places of worship those kingdoms had were of their own devising in the northern kingdom. Jerusalem and Judah of the southern kingdom bear the name of Aholibah, which means my tabernacle is in her, because their temple was the place which God himself had chosen to put his name there. Verse 5, And Aholah, the northern kingdom, played the harlot when she was mine, and she doted on her lovers, on the Assyrians, her neighbors, which were clothed with blue, captains and rulers, all of them desirable, young men, horsemen, riding upon horses. And it said within the comments how that the Assyrian army, especially the captains and the higher of rank, they were very fond of wearing blue. So this is where we get clothed with blue. And what's being talked about here is how these women were meant to be like queens of the earth, precious, royal. But instead they become just depraved and wretched prostitutes. Even worse than prostitutes, adulteresses through their idolatry. And that's what's being spoken of right here primarily with this whoredom. Thus she committed her whoredoms with them, the Assyrians, with all them that were the chosen men of Assyria, and with all on whom she doted, with all their idols she defiled herself. Neither left she her whoredoms brought from Egypt, for in her youth they lay with her, and they bruised the breast of her virginity, and poured their whoredom upon her. Even Hosea the prophet, he records this at his time, whenever he writes, Ephraim, the northern kingdom, also is like a silly dove without heart. They call to Egypt, they go to Assyria. Wherefore I have delivered her into the hand of her lovers, into the hand of the Assyrians, upon whom she doted. These discovered her nakedness. They took her sons and her daughters, and slew her with the sword, and she became famous among women, for they had executed judgment upon her. And when her sister, Aholibah, saw this, she was more corrupt in her inordinate love than she. Speaking of after the Assyrians took the northern kingdom captive, brought a bunch of Gentiles in from outside, many heathens and idolaters, and they brought them from the outside, so the land was completely polluted, even more than it was before, and it had become pretty much like all the other nations. But Judah, who still had good kings here and there, she started to become corrupt like her sister. And when her sister Aholibah saw this, she was more corrupt in her inordinate love than she, even more so than she. And in her whoredoms more than her sister in her whoredoms. She doted upon the Assyrians, her neighbors, captains and rulers, clothed most gorgeously, horsemen riding upon horses, all of them desirable young men. Then I saw that she was defiled, Jerusalem, and Judah as a whole. Then I saw that she was defiled, that they took both one way. Both the kingdoms went the same way after these idols. And that she increased her whoredoms, for when she saw men portrayed upon the wall the images of the Chaldeans, Babylon, portrayed with vermilion, girded with girdles upon their loins, exceeding in dyed attire upon their heads, all of them princes to look to, after the manner of the Babylonians of Chaldea, the land of their nativity. And as soon as she saw them with her eyes, she doted upon them, and sent messengers unto them and to Chaldea. Now let's get just a little bit more detailed with the history of whenever they started to become so corrupt. If you'll remember, King Ahaz sent messengers, king of Judah, Ahaz sent messengers to Assyria in 2 Kings 16. And Hezekiah entertained ambassadors from Babylon after he was granted 15 more years, 2 Kings 20. But besides these, Ahaz and Hezekiah, the whole history of the times implies that there must have been frequent embassies of which no special mention is made between Babylon and Judah, how they kept in constant contact. One from Zedekiah is incidentally mentioned by Jeremiah, and Zedekiah meaning the final king of Judah. But the final king, incidentally, he had one mentioned by Jeremiah, this embassy, of which there is no record in history. Verse 17, and the Babylonians came to her into the bed of love, and they defiled her with their whoredom, and she was polluted with them, and her mind was alienated from them. Catch that. She was polluted with them, these idols, and her mind was alienated from them. So she discovered her whoredoms and discovered her nakedness. Then my mind was alienated from her. Scariest spot in the world to be in. I've said that many times. God's mind was alienated from her, like as my mind was alienated from her sister. Once again, notice how it says that her mind was alienated from them. Judah was alienated from these Babylonian idols after a time. Interpreted by the history, the words point to the fact that Judah soon found out how hollow was the help gained by the alliance with Babylon, and turned, after Josiah's death, to Egypt as a counterpoise. As in the history of Amnon, if you'll remember King David's son Amnon, how once that he had his sister and fulfilled his lust with her, like Judah with Babylon, after he did that, he saw how hollow it was, and when it had wrought its will, passed into loathing and disgust. Verse 19, yet she multiplied her whoredoms, in calling to remembrance the days of her youth, wherein she had played the harlot in the land of Egypt. For she doted upon their paramours, whose flesh is as the flesh of asses, and whose issue is like the issue of horses. Their paramours. The word is masculine, as indicating the abominable sins copied by the Israelites from the heathen, and the asses and horses are introduced to show the intensity of lust. Verse 21, thus thou callest to remembrance the lewdness of thy youth, and bruising thy teats by the Egyptians for the paps of thy youth. Therefore, O Aholibah, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I will raise up thy lovers against thee. Listen to this. He says, I'm going to raise these up against thee, from whom thy mind is alienated, and I will bring them against thee on every side. Notice the Lord could bring any other nation. He could strengthen anybody else in the entire world and bring them in order to chastise them in whatever way that he wished. But instead, he says, no, by the same ones that you fell from me, so will you now fall. And this is truly so layered in its punishment, because they were worshiping in Jerusalem, they were worshiping the gods of these two nations. So this shows how the gods that they were worshiping could not protect them against the God in whom they left. Verse 23, the Babylonians and all the Chaldeans, Pekod and Shoa and Koa, and all the Assyrians with them, all of them desirable young men, captains and rulers, great lords and renowned, all of them riding upon horses. And they shall come against thee with chariots, wagons, and wheels, and with an assembly of people, which shall set against thee buckler and shield and helmet round about. And I will set judgment before them, and they shall judge thee according to their judgments. Notice the persistent mention within this chapter of the horses and the chariots, wagons, wheels, and all of these assemblies. In Judah, Israel as a whole, they did not have many horses. They envied the nations that did have them and were skilled horsemen in warfare. And I will set my jealousy against thee, and they shall deal furiously with thee. They shall take away thy nose and thine ears. Pay attention to this. They shall take away thy nose and thine ears, and thy remnant shall fall by the sword, the few that are left of you that haven't already taken so much punishment. They shall take thy sons and thy daughters, and thy residue shall be devoured by the fire. We're told about this mutilation process. Take away thy nose and thine ears. The barbarous custom of mutilating prisoners prevailed in the East from the earliest times. It is here mentioned with a special reference to the destruction of the attractiveness of the adulteress Aholibah, Judah. In Egypt, adultery was punished by cutting off the nose and ears. So this is a very fitting punishment. Verse 26. They shall also strip thee out of thy clothes and take away thy fair jewels. Thus will I make thy lewdness to cease from thee, and thy whoredom brought from the land of Egypt, so that thou shalt not lift up thine eyes unto them, nor remember Egypt any more. Now once again, keep in mind how, yes, there is this immediate fulfillment of this prophecy, but whenever they return from the captivity after 70 years, but there's also this hinting at the latter days, whenever they would remember them no more, never look to them again. For thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I will deliver thee into the hand of them whom thou hatest, into the hand of them from whom thy mind is alienated. And they shall deal with thee hatefully, and shall take away all thy labor, and shall leave thee naked and bare, and the nakedness of thy whoredoms shall be discovered, both thy lewdness and thy whoredoms. I will do these things unto thee, because thou hast gone a whoring after the heathen, and because thou art polluted with their idols. Thou hast walked in the way of thy sister. Therefore will I give her cup into thine hand. They, the Jews, actually saw what happened to the idolatrous northern tribes, the 10 northern tribes. The Jews saw what happened to them. They lost their sovereignty as a people. They were scattered, and many of them killed, many of them taken slaves by the Assyrians. And they saw all of this because of their idolatry, and yet they did the exact same thing. Verse 32, Thus saith the Lord God, Thou shalt drink of thy sister's cup deep and large, meaning the cup of God's wrath. Thou shalt be laughed to scorn and had in derision. It containeth much. Thou shalt be filled with drunkenness and sorrow, with the cup of astonishment and desolation, with the cup of thy sister Samaria. Thou shalt even drink it, and suck it out, and thou shalt break the sherds thereof, and pluck off thine own breast. For I have spoken it, saith the Lord God. Pay attention to these details. It's traumatic to read. This traumatic imagery is coming out. Even cut off their own breast. For I have spoken it, saith the Lord God. Therefore, thus saith the Lord God, because thou hast forgotten me and cast me behind thy back, therefore bear thou also thy lewdness and thy whoredoms. The act of plucking out her own breast is that of one intoxicated to madness. Verse 36, The Lord said moreover unto me, Son of man, wilt thou judge Aholah and Aholibah? Yea, declare unto them their abominations, that they have committed adultery, and blood is in their hands, and with their idols have they committed adultery, and have also caused their sons, whom they bear unto me, to pass for them through the fire to devour them. Can you imagine the selfishness involved in such an act, though? It's the same way with abortion in most cases, the vast majority of cases, almost all of them. It is solely for the regard of the mother or the parents that they have abortions, well, they would burn their sons back then to these idols. They would burn them in order for their self to be prosperous, or for their own iniquities or whatever against their false gods to be forgiven. So they would have them bear the agony of it. But we also read about how, and not only have they committed adultery and worshiped these false gods, but the blood is in their hands. Now, this is pointing towards, in part, to them sacrificing their sons unto these false gods, but it's also pointing to how they killed the prophets. Jesus spoke of this, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how thou killest the prophets. Moreover, this they have done unto me. They have defiled my sanctuary in the same day, and have profaned my Sabbaths. Pay attention to that. They have defiled my sanctuary, talking about the temple. They've defiled it. We'll talk about that right here in just a second. In the same day. Now, this is just iniquity upon iniquity that we would never even imagine that they would possibly fathom doing. But in the same day, and have profaned my Sabbaths. For when they had slain their children to their idols, then they came the same day into my sanctuary to profane it. And lo, thus have they done in the midst of mine house. And just for further clarification on this, when they had newly polluted themselves with most horrid crimes, idolatry, and murder, they thrust into the temple. Whereas by the law, if they had been but unclean by touch of a dead body, by the law of Moses, if they had even touched a dead body, they must have been cleaned by sacrifices before they ought to come into company with the Jews. But right here, they do every other thing that is so wicked. Not only dead bodies, but their dead children, dead prophets. And then on the very same day, they go, and furthermore, that ye have sent for men to come from far, unto whom a messenger was sent. And lo, they came, for whom thou didst wash thyself, paintedst thy eyes, and deckest thyself with ornaments, and satest upon a stately bed, and a table prepared before it, whereupon thou hast set mine incense and mine oil. And a voice of a multitude being at ease was with her, and with the men of the common sort were brought Sabians. Pay attention to this, the Sabians from the wilderness, which put bracelets upon their hands, and beautiful crowns upon their heads. Then said I unto her that was old in adulteries, will they now commit whoredoms with her, and she with them, even the Sabians? The Sabians were notorious for robberies and spoiling the merchants, seeking them out, lying in wait, robbing people along the paths. These were brought to Jerusalem from the wilderness, deserts of Arabia, a rude, barbarous, and idolatrous scum of men. Of these were they that destroyed Job's servants, we're even told in the book of Job, the first chapter. Verse 45. Yet they went in unto her, as they go in unto a woman that playeth the harlot. So went they in unto Aholah and unto Aholibah, the lewd women. And the righteous men, they shall judge them after the manner of adulteresses, and after the manner of women that shed blood, because they are adulteresses, and blood is in their hands. For thus saith the Lord God, I will bring up a company upon them, and will give them to be removed and spoiled. And the company shall stone them with stones, and dispatch them with their swords. They shall slay their sons and their daughters, and burn up their houses with fire. The punishment, stoning, the punishment was of an adulteress. And this was in a manner done when the engines of the Babylonian army, which cast mighty stones into the besieged city, dashed out the brains of some. And when the chimneys or walls or towers, beat down by those stones cast out of the engines, fell on the others, and buried them alive. Thus will I cause lewdness to cease out of the land, that all women may be taught not to do after your lewdness, and they shall recompense your lewdness upon you, and ye shall bear the sins of your idols, and ye shall know that I am the Lord God.